Thank you all for coming to the Interprofessional Telehealth Education Preparing the Modern Provider session. My name is Louise Knott. I'm a project officer for the Office for the Advancement of Telehealth at the Health Resources and Services Administration, and I'll be the moderator for the session. Our speaker today is Janine Lohman, who is the Associate Professor in the Department of Communication Sciences and Disorders at the University of Kentucky. I think depending on how many people we have, it looks like we might be able to take a few questions throughout the presentation, but I'll let Janine speak to that. And we encourage you to view Janine's bio in the virtual agenda as well. And I'll pass it over to you.
Yes, so I'm in Communication Sciences and Disorders, aka Speech Language Pathology, for that, and I'm also the director of the Center for Telehealth Education Research and Outreach, which is housed in our College of Health Sciences. So we'll just do a little bit of housekeeping to begin with here. My disclosures that I have are financially, I have a salary from the University of Kentucky. I also have grant funding from National Institutes of Health, Department of Education, and the National Association of Athletic Trainers. And some of that work is funded what I'll be talking about. So what I'll do is just kind of give you an overview of what I'll be speaking about. And I am speaking about at the preparatory level. So we train future providers. And so what I'm going to be talking about, our professional interpersonal education is aimed towards that preparatory level, although we do have practicing professionals who participate, and I'll talk more about that. But I just want to be clear that's where we're coming from, is that academic environment. So I'll talk first a little bit about our telehealth journey and how we got to an interprofessional education model. I'll talk about how we developed the curriculum. Then I'll give you an overview of that curriculum, the courses, and kind of the content of those courses and what we teach, program outcome data, some of our lessons we've learned in trying to get multiple programs into a collaborative effort, and then future directions. I am going to get pretty granular because when I first started this journey back in 2014, and I'd go to places and they'd be like, oh, we train providers. And I'm like, okay, but on what? Like, what do you train them on? And then they might go, oh, we train them on technology. And I'm like, okay, but what? Like, I need some learning outcomes or something. I need to know what they were able to do at the end. So I'm going to try to help answer that question for you if you have that question, by saying, here's what we do, here's the way we train it, here are the skills we teach, and here are some of those activities so that our students can master that. So first, what I'd like to do is I'd like to give you a warm welcome from Big Blue Nation. Go Big Blue Nation. If you're into sports at all, that means a lot to you because we are AKA University of Kentucky, but the rest of the nation knows this is Big Blue Nation. So we are the land-grant institution for the state of Kentucky. We have about 32,000 students total, with about 85 of those at the graduate level, 8,500 of those, which is where we're drawing from for our certificate. At the University of Kentucky, we have 19 colleges, and as you can see there, 7 of them are in the healthcare professions. The only thing we're missing from being a comprehensive medical institution is small animal. We have large animal. Can you guess why? I mean, equine, derby, yes. So we have big animal vet. We just don't have little animal vet for that. We also do have UK healthcare system, which we are attached to, and the main location is there on campus with the satellite clinics throughout our state. As far as the College of Health Sciences, which is where I'm located and the certificate is originating from, our college has about 1,400 students in it. We have 9 different programs. So we have speech language pathology, physical therapy, we have athletic training, physician's assistants, we have a clinical nutrition and management, clinical leadership. We also have an undergraduate degree in health and human sciences, which is what a lot of students take that are pre-medical, pre-medicine, pre-dentistry, pre-PT. And so they get a bachelor's in that. Just so you understand the state of Kentucky, we have kind of like the whole gamut of geography in our state. If you start on the eastern side of our state, that region of Kentucky is part of the Appalachian region, and we have about 57 counties that comprise that. It's very mountainous and cold. And then we come to the middle of our state and we get very urban with Lexington. We go up north and we're right on the border of Cincinnati in the Covington area. If you go on down south in the middle swatch of our state, we get into Bowling Green, which is about an hour and a half from Nashville. And then if I move on west, we get more, we have Louisville, which is very urban, but then we get into more farmlands. So we have rurality, but we have it in two different areas. One that's very mountainous, cold, and then we have these farmlands that are out there. As a researcher, that's really great because when I'm trying to show need, I can say, look, we can hit all these different populations for that. We rank 40th in the state when it comes to broadband. Let's see. Well, we have somehow signed out, but it looks like we're still there. So we're going to hit OK and fingers crossed and see what happens. Louise, are we still good?
Yeah, you're still good on our end.
All right, excellent. So I say that just so you kind of understand the climate in which this certificate came from. So what I'd like to do now is talk about kind of our journey. All right, so I'm going to walk you through our telehealth journey that took us to this interprofessional training level. So I came to the University of Kentucky in 2011. Prior to that, my background had been in distance education. I had done an online master's program in speech language pathology. I had training in instructional design. And when I was doing our online master's program, we were starting to see patients clinically. And I, in my naivety, got all excited because I was like, this is the future. And I had no idea this thing called telehealth existed. So I'm going to be fully transparent, right? And so I came to the University of Kentucky and I said, hey, this is where the future's going, blah, blah, blah. And Rob Spring was very kind and said, come, oh, uneducated child, and I will teach you the ways. And, you know, you can be my little Padawan. And I said, oh, yes, great Jedi Master, please teach me. So in 2014, we started with one patient, and it was very important to me that we teach future providers how to engage in telehealth. That's our job. And so let's get a workforce out there prepared. So I had a student, and I told the student, I don't know how this is going to go, but we're going to do it. And so UK has a telehealth, a very robust telehealth program. And so they said, come on over. And so we went ahead and started to see a child, because pediatrics is my background, in Eastern Kentucky. So I said, we're going to do this. Let's go gangbusters. And there's a shortage of therapists there. So that's where we started. Then the next year came around, and we were able to secure a contract with the Federal Medical Center, which is housed there in Lexington. And so that contract allowed us to start understanding how we could do telehealth in a true organizational sort of system with adults. And so once again, when I do something, I say, well, if we're going to do it, let's go all the way. We go to one of the most restrictive environments in which you can work in, which is the federal prison, as to what you can and can't do. So sometimes we'd be in the middle of a session and it would just go black because they'd gone on lockdown. And who knew when you get to talk to them? So we started getting our fingers wet, figuring out how you do telehealth from a speech and language standpoint, and then also how do you train. So we had students involved in this the entire time. Then 2016 came around, and that really propelled us into this idea of preparation and training. I got a grant from the Department of Education to train providers, future providers, speech language pathologists in the use of telehealth. It was a Department of Ed grant, so the stipulation was that we would train them in pediatrics with the hope that they would go back and work in schools to address shortages. And if you went to the earlier presentation, you saw that ST, as that speaker spoke, is like a 3-month wait list for that. And so that's what we focused on. There's our first group. It looks small, but we got funded in April, and they said, hey, you need to lock in your funding. Can you start this summer? And our students already had clinicals ready and that type of thing. So we had 6 students who said yes. They got tuition and stipend support. And then at graduation, they went and worked with pediatrics as a payback. So within that, we started figuring out, how do you train? Like, what knowledge and skills do they need? We also started learning about all those other pieces like telehealth literacy and technology literacy and onboarding families, because our students did a clinical experience with a family in the home setting, and then also a clinical experience in the schools. What does telehealth look like in a school environment for that? So we had to work through, how do you market, how do you educate, how do you train families to use Zoom? And that's the platform we were using at UK. And then our dean said, hey, if we're going to get in this game, then we need our own space. So the other thing we got in 2016 was our own telehealth room. So that's what you see pictured kind of there off to the side. Let me see if I can move people around for a second. So he built us out our own telehealth room, so we didn't have to keep going over to UK Telecare for that. So he built that room out. That room, just as an FYI, which you see there, was about $5,000. So if you are at a training institution, these are pretty cheap to build out overall. This room actually cost me more than that because we had to put a Polycom system in. So if you've been at this for a long time, you know what I mean by a Polycom. It's a dedicated system. So that ran about $20,000, and that's because our prison at the time only connected via Polycom. They weren't using Zoom yet, and so we had that into that room. So in 2016, we really started figuring out how you teach, how you train, what knowledge and skills, and then we got our own facilities to start doing it. There. Then in 2019, we just started, we used that year for a lot of growth. We got a second telehealth room, which you see pictured there. That one ran me about $7,000 total because we also purchased some iPads so we could train on iPads, some backup laptops, that type of thing. And then we also started delivering services, and as you can see, across the state. So we were delivering services in the home for speech and language and to school districts throughout the state as part of our training. And so we started having this conversation in 2019 about, hey, other professions need to be trained in this. So how do we go about doing that? And that's when we put together our certificate. And so then in 2020 is when we got that certificate approved, and it went live for the first time. So in 2020, we were actually doing 2 training programs because we still had the grant from the Department of Ed. So we were training speech language pathologists only. And then we had this new interprofessional certificate that went live. And so that's a picture of just some of our first cohort that participated. We had more than that, but this was a dinner we had because for 2 years they had been without people. And so in 21, the state Kentucky started opening up restaurants, and they said, let's go to dinner as part of our graduation. So that's part of that. So we really, through that certificate, put together a curriculum with a scope and sequence for that. And we are now getting ready to start our 3rd group in this interprofessional. So that's what I'd like to speak about now going forward. So that's kind of our journey and where we got to where we're at now. So let's take a look here. I'm going to see, give me a second. Let me do that. So I'm going to do it right there. All right. So what I'd like to do now is kind of talk to you about our telehealth graduate certificate itself. I'd like to talk to you about how we developed our curriculum, talk about the 3 courses that comprise that curriculum, what's taught in it, what the students do, and share with you some program outcome data and our lessons learned. Please feel free at any time just to ask me a question. I mean, there's a few of us, we might as well stop on that slide and talk through. All right, so what I'd like to start with is kind of the goal of this certificate, because you have to be clear so you understand what we do and why we do it. So our goal really was to create leaders that can not only deliver telehealth services, but also can actually go out and develop programs, implement them, and advocate for them. So you might say, oh, well, Johnny, look at where we're at right now. But remember, this was created back in 2019. So who could have seen COVID? Even now, as you know and have been experiencing, there's still a lot of people that haven't done telehealth. So when we look at the data in rehab, only about 47% of PTs in a recent survey indicate that they've even done telehealth, even during COVID. They said we were either seeing patients in person or we weren't seeing them at all. We still have about 40% of SLPs who said, I really haven't done tele or I've done it via consult only. There, when we look at the data across different patient populations, we still see about 30% of America hasn't done telehealth. So there are still a lot of programs out there, particularly in our rehab groups, where a lot of it's private practice, where they really haven't built sustainable programs. They're just kind of trying to continue to develop services. So that was really the goal when we created this program, is to have these leaders that can go out and help advocate and develop sustainable programs for that. So our target population is, we were really focusing on graduate students in a healthcare program. We decided that we would really start in-house and really advertise within our own college, which is CSD, PT, PA, and AT. But we opened it up to any healthcare profession. To qualify, you had to have at least 1 year completed in your program of study, so you came with some clinical knowledge. Like, how would you do therapy, or what treatments would you do, and at least one clinical experience. Because y'all know, if you don't know how to do it in person, you're not going to know how to do it in tele. So you had to come to the table with that. We also opened it up to practicing healthcare professionals. So if you're a practicing healthcare professional, you can participate too. But our target audience really was that graduate student. And we have had both, and I'll talk about some of our participants as we go on. So our curriculum, what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with kind of the big picture end of what we ended up developing, talk about that process, and then give you some specific knowledge and skills that we teach. So at the heart, our curriculum is organized into 5 domains, and at the heart of it is discipline specific. So I know I have a physical therapist here. I've learned that somebody over there is a nurse practitioner. So we really recognize that that's what drives everything else, is whatever best practices in your discipline then is going to drive what you do in tele. We also make it very clear that telehealth is one service delivery model that should be in the toolkit. So we teach our students from the beginning, this may not be appropriate for every patient, for every service at every stage of the continuum. We're very clear about that. We're also very clear that best practice drives. Then from that, we have competencies related to ethical, legal, and reimbursement. We have competencies related to technology, with security and safety. I'll get into that more in a second. Practice, how do you actually do your best practice? And then the domain 5, which is near and dear to my heart, is implementation and sustainability. And I think that's the big question right now for a lot of places, is how sustainable are these programs for that. As a researcher, because that's a good bit of what I do, sustainability is very important to me, because we can prove that things work in very controlled environments, but then when I go and want to dump it in your workplace, you say, Johnny, what are you talking about? This doesn't work. It's because we don't have that translation to actual practice. And so I really like that we talk to them about this idea of implementation and sustainability. The other thing that's really important that you'll see in our curriculum is we recognize that we're going to have providers that want to work with different populations. So when we look at these domains, we talk about them across the lifespan. So we talk about, what does telehealth look like with infants and toddlers and working with their parents? What does it look like in schools, whether the school is providing the service or it's a school-based health center? What does it look like with adults? What does it look with geriatrics and like in SNF? So we also talk about it across the lifespan, and lifespan, you have different locations where you're going to receive services. We also talk about what telehealth looks like in a variety of different settings. So what does it look like for early intervention when you're working in the home with families of 0 to 3? What does it look like in a school, in a SNF, and an ICU? So as we talk across these different domains, we also touch on lifespan and setting issues. So it makes it very robust. Now then, our curriculum development, how did we get to those specific domains? And then what I'll show you in a second, specific knowledge and skills. We basically employed research and we started doing a meta synthesis. So we just started taking anything we could find that was related to the delivery of telehealth. So we went to the American Telemedicine Association. We looked at like principles for delivery telerehab, the guidelines for on-demand primary and urgent care. We looked at things like eye contact, tele-environment. We looked at operational guidelines from ATA. We went to professional organizations and we said, what does AMA say? What does the American Association of Physical Therapists? What does ASHA, speech language and hearing, like what is everybody saying are the basic knowledge and skills you need? And we just started spreadsheets and it was like, check, 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 check. We're hearing all of this same thing, so that must be very, very important. We did literature reviews. What are people who've done any research on this saying? What are books that are being read? Because when we were putting this together in 2014, 15, 16, there weren't textbooks. Like there was nowhere for me to go and get a textbook and say, here, use this, it'll teach everything. For that. We went to the National Consortium of Telehealth Resource Centers, which Matrix is one of them. And we said, what are they constantly talking about? And we also went to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. So we really try to be very comprehensive because we were like, what does it take to be a good teleprovider regardless of your discipline? So those are the sources that we went through and looked at. Another thing that when we were developing our curriculum is that we wanted to make sure we didn't focus on a discipline, that we really focused on that behavior, that tele-behavior. So what I mean by that is regardless of the discipline, you have to know how to direct a telepresenter. It doesn't matter if you're like cardiology or if you're a nurse or PT or an SLP, lactation, you have to know how to direct somebody that's there with the patient. So that would be like a ubiquitous skill that you would need. Pretty much any sort of provider at some point is going to need to use a second camera, you know, so that would be that more universal skill. So we tried to focus on those things. We also found that it's going to be very important because we couldn't possibly teach every specific clinical skill that you might do. I can't even do that in speech path. You know, that's very difficult. So we really wanted to empower our students to become meta-tele providers, being able to think through how would I take this in person and convert it digitally and do it and give them that skill set. So basically, you know, that old proverb, give them a fish, you feed them for a day, teach them how to fish. So that's what we were trying to go with that motto is how do you think this through? So in the future, no situation is beyond your scope. You're like, okay, I know the questions to ask, maybe I have a spreadsheet to go to, and I can problem solve this. It also became very apparent to us that if we really were going to make leaders, we had to look at the breadth and depth of tele, and our students needed some training in that. So it became apparent that they needed to know something about like health literacy. They needed to know things about like program evaluation so you could go to your organization and say, hey, this is working. Let me show you the data and talk about data that's going to be valuable to them. Social determinants of health. You know, why would people use tele? Why would they not? What would be barriers to that? Coaching. Coaching is huge across everybody. You know, and coaching. Accessibility. I mean, my bread and butter is people with disabilities. So what are you going to do in tele when somebody comes and they have vision impairments, or they have hearing loss, or they have stroke? And so communication is very difficult for them. Accessibility. Workflow. I know I'm in here with a lot of people at the organization level. What does workflow look like in tele, and what are some barriers to that? And so that they go out understanding that. And then some basic budgets. What is it looking at? So all of those things came together into what you see here. Now then, what I've done here is just taken a snippet of our curriculum. My PowerPoint slides are there as a handout, but this I did include as a handout, and it's not there, but I'll make sure it gets uploaded to just kind of give you a snippet of what we teach and when. So what you see here, kind of the layout, is on the far left columns are the actual knowledge and skills. And then as you go column by column, that's just the courses. So we have 3 courses, RHB 730, 731, 732. So where it's kind of dark gray shaded, and I see it's not showing that clearly here on the screen, but where it's more dark shaded is where we really teach that skill. And then where it's lighter gray is where we come back and we revisit it, kind of that spiral learning for that. And then what you see in the boxes is I've given some examples of some of the learning activities or things that we talk about. So like under ethics, legal, and reimbursement, we teach them about state regulations, particularly including telehealth. So one thing that we do in there is we teach them about consent. And so we look at different consent forms, we look at how you consent to get at that workflow, when you would consent, what's permissible, and also have them look at that against their licensure. In Kentucky, for speech language pathologists, our licensure says that there are 7 different elements that have to be in that consent form. That's not true for our physician providers. But it says if I want to be in compliance with my state licensure, here are 7 things that they must have in that consent form. So we have them look at their license and then compare it to different consent forms and see if anything needs to be added. Knowledge of federal regulations regarding telehealth, we hit that early in the first course, but then in the second course, one thing that we do is we take a look at like different video sessions, we take a look at different stored forward, and we kind of play the can you spot the HIPAA violation, you know? And so we look for that person that's in the back of the video that has no business being there. We go and look at stored forward websites and we go, okay, where could there be a potential for a HIPAA violation here for that? Yes, sir.
So are the elements different for in-person versus telehealth in the state of Kentucky? Or is it looked at as healthcare, and it's just a different mode for which you're providing the care?
Excellent question. That really is going to depend by your provider group. So like for speech language pathology, we have back to that consent. Our licensure board says these 7 things must be in your consent form versus the licensure board for PT in Kentucky just says, just consent. Like in Kentucky, our licensure right now for speech language pathologists says to start a new patient relationship, you must meet that patient in person or have a healthcare provider with that patient to serve as your proxy. PT doesn't have that. But OT in our state pre-pandemic didn't even have any language about telehealth. So really in Kentucky, and that's not unusual, there are a lot of states that got caught short in the pandemic that have nothing on their practice hours. Yeah. In technology, we've kind of broken that down. So we talk about like how to use voice over internet. They get exposed to different systems that are out there. In fact, class is technically tonight, so their assignment for tonight is they've been assigned different video conferencing platforms and they have to talk about the features and try them out, and I know they're just loving me tonight, okay? So they get exposed to different platforms that are out there. We do use Zoom, that's what we've adopted. There's other great platforms. We have them do a Zoom competency checkout. We have them practice password protecting meetings. We have them solve audio and video problems. In fact, that's one thing they actually create in that first course, a troubleshooting handout. So they identify a patient population, they identify a device type like a cell phone or an iPad or a Mac computer, because the way you fix troubleshooting is different on each one. And so then they have to take principles of health literacy, they apply it, and they create a troubleshooting handout they can send to that family or that patient. Then we all upload it. Google Drive is my favorite place because you can share so easily. And then they leave with all these troubleshooting handouts that can be used with different patient populations and different devices. Practice, we get into things like the environment and acknowledging the environment. We have them actually do a mock teleroom and build it out down to a color swatch. What color would you do the wall behind you so it's in compliance? They say Benjamin color, da-da-da, they give you the swatch. We do a purchase order. If your employer said, hey, how much is it gonna cost? You already have a purchase order ready to go, some basic costs and know how to do that. We get into things like client selection, what does it look like across the lifespan, diagnostics, looking at diagnostics that are visual, physical, use of technology, etc. We get them also into interpersonal and how you develop that. So those are some of the things we teach under practice. And then under implementation and sustainability, how do you actually develop a plan and integrate it within your organization, and then how do you develop and adapt relationship building for that. So that's kind of a snippet of some of those knowledge and skills that we teach, and then when we do that. Okay, so a little bit about our scope and sequence. So you are admitted as a cohort, and we always start in the summer. So the first course is offered in the summer, the second is in the fall, and the third is in the spring. That was done strategically because a lot of our degree programs graduate in the spring. And so if we started it in the summer, they could have it done in time for graduation. And it stayed one consistent group. If we started in the fall, you might have some that started and graduated and some that are continuing on. So that was a conversation we had with a variety of different professions, and we decided summer was the best start date for that. We do offer our training online. We use a distance education model for that, so it's a mix of hybrid. So we do some weeks are synchronous, they get on via Zoom and we talk and we do things, and then some of the content is asynchronous. And that's based on adult learning models. If I can teach this skill set asynchronously, then we do that. If it needs to be live, we do. I will tell you anecdotally what's been interesting about that is the students have consistently said, we like meeting. If you had asked me, I would have said they want everything asynchronous. I'll do it when I want to, right? These things. But honestly, even when I was doing links, every year, since about 2016, one thing the students say in their course evals is, we like it when we meet. We like being together. So they really like that sense of community for that. So that's just something anecdotally I've picked up on for that. We use our learning management system in Zoom, and then we offer our courses in the evening. All of our students and even practicing professionals are out, they're out on clinicals, they're working, so they can't do it during the day. So we offer it on the evenings. We do Tuesday nights because it works for my schedule, and we do it Tuesday nights 6 to 8:30, and it stays that way during all 3 courses. That way they can just block it for the year, and they know my Tuesday nights is when I need to have blocked for class. So that's kind of how we implement that. All right, so what I'd like to do in the next couple of slides is get a little bit more granular with you and talk through and kind of highlight each of the 3 classes and what we cover in there. So I'll talk about the basic focus of that class, some of the content, and then share with you some of the ways that we teach that or some of the ways that we assess that knowledge. So the very first course is a very basic Tele 101. Here's the basic technology you need, here's basic etiquette, here's how you work with a presenter, here's basic HIPAA, state regulatory, just very rudimentary there. The content is divided up into 2 parts. So we have content that you might say is like tele-related, and then we have content that's hardcore technology. Because one thing I have learned is that we think this generation, and I don't even know, like, are they the XYZ millennials? I don't even know what to call them. I mean, so somebody educate me on that, but I just lost that. That's like something I can't keep up with. And I'm an 18-year-old, so you think I'd be able to do that? No. I mean, I'm like, are we snapping? Are we tweeting? What are we doing today? You know? But what I've learned from them is they really don't understand technology. Like, they truly, when you ask them what the internet is, you're like, I know I should say the cloud, but I don't know what else to say, the cloud. Like, they are blown away. Their first thing that they have to do on the technology side is they watch a video that talks about how the internet is hardwired, and it's a cable that runs around the world implanted in the ocean. It's embedded in the ocean. And they are like, you know, and then there's a cable that runs to your house, you know, or to your apartment complex somewhere. You might Wi-Fi off of that, but somewhere, you know. They finally go, oh, IPN, you know, ISP, that's what that means, you know, internet service provider. And so I just learned that we start there. We talk about Wi-Fi versus DSL versus cable. We talk about things like security. What does it really mean when you say encrypted? What does it mean when you talk about firewalls or malware or viruses? Because if they're going to be in this game, they need to do that. And I'll tell you one thing our students have come back and said is they said, oh my gosh, that helps so much when working with IT. Because now we have a common language, like mesh. They're like, okay, don't fully get that, but I get a little bit of it, you know? And I'm like, I'm right there with you. That's why we have IT. So they really think that it helps them there. While we do that, we're also talking about what you might consider more telehealth. Like, we get into the history of it, models, regulatory, that type of thing. The other thing we do in this class, we kind of map on this, is we start talking about health literacy and how important that is that our patients can actually understand material and training that we give them. That it's useless to do some sort of educational guide if they can't understand it. And so we use materials by the CDC called Simply Put that tells you if you're going to create written materials, here's how to do it. Like, they actually get down to here's the best font to use. And I get giddy over stuff like that, you know, because I'm like, just streamline it for me. Tell me what's going to work. And so we also, the other thing we do in this course is we teach them some rudimentary best practices for training personnel. And then they put that together in the package, and they have to train somebody in how to use Zoom as if it's a telepresenter. So they put that together, they do the training, and so they learn some of those basic skills. The way we do that in some of the activities we do is we do like a Zoom competency checkout where they actually have to show their competence in Zoom. They create a variety of different cheat sheets, like one for how to use Zoom, one how to troubleshoot. We do, okay, it sounds silly, but they love it. Their first assignment is we all develop these superhero trading cards as a way to start developing interprofessional education. And so, like, they have to know, here's what a PT is, here's something you may not have known that PTs do, here's my technology super skill, so if you have problems with this, come to me. And they just really seem to like that. Even my providers, they're like, oh, this is cool, it's something different. We do some activities with spot checking for security risk. We do some simulations with collecting consent for that. Our teaching tools are Canvas, and then if you are into education, H5P is something, it's a piece of software that's out there. It used to be free, but now they have a minimal charge. But what H5P does is it allows me to take videos and I can make them interactive. So I can take a YouTube video, and now I can embed hotspots, I can embed questions, multiple choice, I can add written directions. It really lets me take video, make it interactive. It also allows me to put pictures up there and create hotspots for them to check on. So it allows me to make some very engaging, interactive learning activities there. Okay, our second course that we teach is looking at developing sustainable telehealth programs. So what does telehealth look like across the lifespan and in different settings? And so the way we've organized this course is we've organized it around a framework. And so that framework is the non-adoption, abandonment, and challenges to scale up, spread, and sustainability. That's a mouthful, or the NAS framework. What the NAS framework did is it went through and it validated if programs fail, why? If technology-based programs fail, why? And so it was really looking at sustainability and implementation. So we use that model to organize our whole course. So in that semester, we talk about telehealth at the wider system. So that brings us back to reimbursement, it brings us back to HIPAA, some of that, that's that wider. Then we look at telehealth at the organization level. You know, what needs to be in place in a school setting? What needs to be in place in a SNP? We take a look at adopters. We know from the research, and I've even heard people here talking about it, clinical providers are the #1 variable that comes up in studies for the past 20 years as a make or break for the success of a telehealth program. No matter what research across healthcare disciplines keeps coming up, it's the provider. If they buy in, your telehealth program is going to be sustainable. We look at the value proposition, technology, and conditions. So we kind of talk about all these domains that have been shown to either make or break the sustainability of the telehealth program. And then as we talk about them, we talk about what does that look like in the home setting, whether it's home health or early intervention. What does it look like in a school, whether the school is providing those services or it's school-based. We talk about medical facilities and then SNPs. And then we also add on to that some more about health literacy. And we also start exposing them to some validated tools that are out there for measuring an organization's readiness for telehealth, for measuring a patient or provider's readiness, so that they leave with some validated tools to go in and be able to use. Some of the ways that we teach that content is they have a semester-long project where they actually develop a mock telehealth program. So they identify a setting, they identify a patient base, and then they apply the different principles that we talk about to developing a telehealth program for that, within that. Typically what they do is they take whatever their clinical setting is, like our students, if they're out on clinical rotation, and they transform that into a telehealth program. We also do different tech talks, so they continue to learn about technology. We have a variety of guest speakers. I don't do home health. So I have a variety of different guest speakers that can come in that can talk about what does telehealth look like in that home health setting. We evaluate a variety of different telehealth materials, and then we use a series of case studies for that. Our teaching tools that we use a lot of Padlet. It's kind of like a Pinterest, where you can make boards very quickly on that. I use a lot of videos from the National Consortium of Telehealth Resource Centers. There's some great resources there that I pull from. I go to healthit.gov. Healthit.gov has some really great training tools. And I know on my back table, y'all are doing some telehealth. I just saw y'all at another. They have some excellent, because I know y'all are trying to get telehealth, you're doing it. Healthit.gov has some great materials for providers, for patients, really, really nice tools. So we go and we just pull. I do not believe in reinventing the wheel. So we go there and we look. And I also look at the Agency for Healthcare Research and Quality. They have like a great consenting chart tool for patients with low health literacy. They have some great different tools in different languages. So I'm like, let's go look at them. Let's pull them. Let's talk about how we would use this. Let's use what's out there. So those are some of the places I go to get my teaching tools for my content and to direct what we talk about. And then our very last course, this is the course that I think when the students said I want to do this certificate, they thought they would be doing. This is the hands-on. This is now where you take, how would you do like a sit-to-stand test, which is something PT does. How would you do that in tele? Or as a speech language pathologist, how do I do a clinical swallow exam? So how do we actually start doing some of these practices? So this course really focuses on implementation, and we talk about it generically, then with pediatrics, and then with adults. And so we have created this observation form, and this is one of the handouts I'm going to give you. And so everything we've been building up to is this provider evaluation form. And so basically the way this class is structured is we take a telehealth competency, so like maybe it's using a second camera. Then we add a professional practice where you would use that second camera, then we map it onto a disorder. So that's how we kind of do that. And then kind of the way the class is structured is we spend like one class meeting, I might teach them how to use a second camera. And we walk through that, and how do you do that on Zoom, how do you do it on a cell phone, that type of thing. Then I break them up into small groups. I give them something from their profession where they would have to use a second camera. They plan that out and do that. And then we come back the next week. I break them up into new groups, and they role play that. And so they get feedback. So somebody's the patient, somebody's the provider, and then somebody is there with that checklist giving them feedback. And every mock session that we do starts at the beginning. It starts with them pretending to collect consent, verifying patient's location, verifying identity, verifying emergency contact. So that way it just becomes second nature to them. We do, like another thing that we do is we just got done with an oncology modules with that. So my PTs and my doctor were looking at wound care. So they were doing wound care within that conversation of oncology, and my speech path were looking at swallowing. So that was speech path specific, and then the wound care, I hit those, and then we talked about it within that oncology population. We've done, another example is having your patient use manipulatives. Every different discipline, at some point you might need your patient to have a manipulative, like mini mental. You give them a paper, they have to put it on the ground, they have to fold it for that. So we just pick then something in your discipline where you have to use a manipulative. You plan that out, plan how you would direct it, and then we come back together. They love this class because it's every week. It's like hands-on, role-playing, problem solving. And so that's the last class. And then what we do to go back with that spiral learning is then we'll say, okay, at the workflow level, what would need to be in place to make this happen? That was back in the fall course. At the organization level, what would need to be there? And so we start piggybacking the importance of that within that course. All right, so that's very granular, I told you, because I would get very frustrated before going, and they would say, oh, you train them, and I'm like, but on what? So I was like, if I can save you something, I'd like to do that. So let me talk a little bit about some of our program outcomes, our next steps, and then I'll answer any questions that you might have. So at the program evaluation level, we assess competencies, both formative and summative. So formative is kind of like in the moment. So that's like assignment grades, class activities, that role playing, how they're doing on that. At the summative level, we look at course grades. We look at some major projects. So like, for example, their ability to train a telepresenter is considered a major project. So that would be a summative evaluation. Creating tip sheets, that's a summative. Their telehealth, they do, so the very last project they do, and they'll do this in 2 weeks, their capstone project is they are assigned a patient, a person they've never met. They have to collect the case history, they have to consent them, and then they have to do a list of different activities across. And so we take them from the beginning where they have to make initial contact and send that email, send that link, introduce themselves, troubleshooting, then they get on with the patient, they run it through it, it's all recorded, and that's their capstone. So that's coming in 2 weeks, and they're a little bit nervous about it, but I'm like, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. So we kind of do a patient simulation, and that's our final summative. Do you have it or not? At the program level, we use both quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative, we have like their own self-reported of their competencies. So they'll do that soon. We're at the end of all this training, process competencies, how confident do I feel? They rate their interprofessional education and how much this has impacted that. They do some video reflections, which is the qualitative. Here's what I got from it. Here's what could be done better. Here's what I still am unsure about. So that's our qualitative piece. We also track the number of healthcare disciplines that participate in retention, how many complete the certificate. So that's at the program level. So to give you a little bit of data to date, so we have our second cohort graduates in 2 weeks for that. So we've had 20 participants across the 2 cohorts. We've had 12 completers. We have 6 that are currently in process. And we had 2 that withdrew. One withdrew because she was a law student, and they, in the law program, once she got formally into it, they don't allow them to take classes outside of law. And she didn't know that, so that's why she withdrew. And the other student that withdrew was PT, and it just started becoming too much with the clinicals and everything. We've had 7 different disciplines participate. So we've had speech language, OT, PT, we've had physician's assistants, we've had a doctor, we've had public health, pharmacy, and then law. We've had 4 professionals who have participated in it. That was OT, CSD, and then we have a doctor. We've had 14 students, and then we have 2 that I call dual, because they're actually practicing professionals, but they're in our PhD program. So they're doing this as their concentration in their PhD for that. So that kind of gives you a little bit of composition. Recruitment. So let me tell you some of the lessons we've learned about recruitment. One thing we did not anticipate is that in our college, some of our healthcare programs are considered professional programs. So like physical therapy, public health, pharmacy, those are professional programs. Those are not in the graduate school. That's speech language pathology, athletic training, PA, those are in the graduate school. The certificate is housed in the graduate school. So what that means is if you're in a professional program, now you have to apply to the graduate school, be admitted, pay a fee, and then you get it. And like, I did not anticipate that. And that might sound like no big deal, but it's a $65 application fee. And the students, I mean, they're like, $65 is my food for the month. They're like, I know that doesn't sound like much, but, and we're like, okay, we got this. So that is a workaround that I would say. Make sure everybody's in the graduate school or wherever this is going to house. So we're learning how to work around that. Another thing that we didn't anticipate is program sequence. So in the College of Health Sciences and a lot of the medical programs, we run year-round. Our students are enrolled year-round. But when we started and we had interest from social work and from some counseling programs, those graduate programs only run fall and spring. So if the students want to take that summer course, then they're not considered full-time students, and now the cost becomes astronomical. If they're a full-time student, then they can take the, why did I come up there? They can take the certificate, and it's not an additional cost. So we've learned that, so we're trying to figure out how to work around that. Program requirements. At first were a hurdle. So in CSD, our students could take the certificate and it could count for their electives. PT wasn't going to allow that. So they were going to say, you still have to take PT electives and then take this on top of all of that. We did get that worked around, and so the PT program will now accept that. PA, we're working with PA because some of their clinical rotations, that PA student might need to be on call for 24 hours, and so class they can't necessarily make. And that can be worked around. PA said, well, we'll just know which clinicals to put them in. You know, so it's working through some of those things to make sure you ask. And then advertising. We thought we were advertising very well by doing it, but what we found really works best is to go straight to student advisors. So targeting different disciplines that we want to participate, going straight to those student advisors and letting them push it out has really got us more traction there. All right. So what do our students, what are some of their thoughts on it? So this is from our first group, and so they do their self-rating. So they've gone through all the program, and now we're saying, what do you think about your skills? The grades say one thing, I can think one thing, but what do you perceive? And so what I'm showing you here is they have a Likert scale of 1 to 5. The higher you get, the better for that. And so this is our first cohort. And so where in that first cohort, some of the students were saying, I have moderate knowledge when it came to like state regulations, licensing, reimbursement, copyright. So that first cohort said, I'm a little still feeling iffy about that. I'm okay with that in the sense of this. That first cohort started in 2020, and I just sit there in class and go, well, this is what the law says, but this is what you can do right now. Like, really, according to HIPAA, you can't use FaceTime, but right now you can use FaceTime as long as it's a non-public facing, right? So I think some of this insecurity is because they happen to be getting trained in the pandemic when nobody knew anything. So I'm okay with that. I'm like, I think we've got that fixed. Technology related, we had 2 to 6 students who rated and said I had moderate knowledge when it came to internet related issues and encryption and security. So we took that to heart. We added some more in the second group, and so I'll be in more education and training in that area. So I'll be interested to see where we get come from that. Under the area of practice, we had 1 to 3 students who said, you know, I'm either feeling neither competent or incompetent, so kind of neutral, or feeling somewhat incompetent when it came to diagnostics. Taking a look at that. So I think some of that is also just inexperience, I'll be honest. These were graduate students. So I think a little bit of that insecurity stems from, I'm just still trying to figure out how to do it in person, much less in tele. So we did take that to heart to see what we could make clearer for them to beef up their confidence. And then in implementation, when it came to organization, like what does telehealth look like at the organization level, we had 1 or 2 students who either said, I feel neither competent or incompetent or somewhat incompetent when it comes to variables related to organization. I don't take that, I'm not that upset about it because I also think that shows just inexperience. You know, they're students up to this point, so they're working under a preceptor, they're doing whatever their preceptor says, and they're still just trying to figure out how to work with the patient. So I think some of that with experience will come for that. So that's that. Some of our student reflections, they all agree, so this is the videos. They've done the videos and we've analyzed them. So this is kind of an informal overview. They all agree that you need training in telehealth. I mean, that's consistent. They're like, you need to have some training. This is necessary. They said things like, we didn't realize all the logistical issues. I never considered all the logistics that go into it. That was the Farm D. A PT student said, I didn't know 99% of what we were taught, you know, for that. So they all agree you need some training. When it came to aspects of telehealth that they still felt nervous about, one of them, the PT student, said musculoskeletal injuries. I still feel like we need to do some hands-on, so I'm still not feeling comfortable as to when it should be hands-on versus when I can do it in tele. I think a little bit of that too is just professional practice. It's a student, and they're trying to figure that out. An SLP student, but some of the other students said, I'm still struggling with how to tell the patients what I need them to do. So struggling with get very specific and very directed. One of the OT students said, I'm still a little concerned about regulatory and policy changes because I know that's still in flux and I don't know how this is going to pan out. When it came to what are skills that effective teleproviders need, unanimously, they all mentioned being able to direct helpers. Every one of them said you've got to be able to direct a family member, an older adult, somebody, you've got to know how to work with that other person on the other end. They also said that in addition to being competent in your own profession and field, you really need to know how to use teletechnology. You need to know how to use the technology and troubleshoot and do some of that. When it came to interprofessional practice, they unanimously saw that telehealth really could be a viable way for us to be more interprofessional because it negates time, it negates distance, and so they really saw this a game changer for IPE. Our next steps of where we're kind of wanting to go next is we would like to increase some of our asynchronous content so that they can do more independently, don't have to meet online. Also, we're trying to look at maybe moving that 101 course to asynchronous to address that tuition issue so they can take it in the spring and then hook up with the cohort in the fall. So we're looking at that while also maintaining a sense of community because they're very clear. They like that community. And we do stuff like side note, Halloween has always followed around the class. So we had a Halloween party. Everybody came dressed in costume and we played a couple games. We have a Christmas party and everybody comes in their ugly sweater. So we do things, because how do you work together if you just don't know each other and like each other, right? So we do some things there to develop a sense of community like that. We've shown pictures of the new grandchild, and we all oohed and awed, and somebody got engaged, and we oohed and awed over the ring. You know, so building that sense of community. We want to grow our enrollment for that. We need to analyze and disseminate our findings that are coming from that. We also have right now going through our University Senate process and hope to offer in spring of 2023 an undergraduate Tele 101 course. So we have that Health and Human Sciences program. So we like to offer that to anybody in healthcare throughout the university, but through that, so that when they go into medicine or dentistry or psychology, they go in with basics. They understand the consent. They understand how to use some Zoom. They understand licensure. So we feel like we can help the health profession that way at the undergraduate level. We are also working with some UK residents, a residency program in our Eastern Kentucky side to pilot an educational program with their residents. So some intensive in-person training and then sprinkled throughout 3 years of their residency. So Rob Spring and I are working with that group of how can we morph this into provider training for residents. So that's some of our next steps, along with having conversations honestly about where do we go with the certificate and then what do we do with our different programs for that. These are some resources that I kind of mentioned, so links to that, and then my different citations and references that I use. So with that, I'll stop share there, and we have a little bit more time for some questions, or we can end, if we don't have any, take a break for a second, but can I answer any questions or anything?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So on the different domains that you described, can you tell me a little bit more about the difference between domain 1 and domain 4, the discipline specific and then practice, and how you kept those separate?
Yes, so that's a great question. So under practice, that domain 4, we're really looking at some of those basics within telehealth that might be different than discipline. So in that, one of those domains is like teleetiquette.
Okay.
Making eye contact, so that would be like telehealth practice.
Oh, I see. So telehealth almost has its own discipline.
Yes, it's almost its own discipline of practice. Yes, thank you for clarifying that. So we talk about, under that domain of practice, we talk about like working with a helper. You know, what does that look like? Because when you're in person, you typically don't. So that would be something in telehealth practice that's different. Mm-hmm. And then the way you work with that teleprovider, that telepresenter, might look different if you're in nursing or if you're in PT or ST, and also your patient population. So how I work with a family member would be different than in a SNF working with a nurse. We get into teleetiquette in that, like mirror making eye contact, so where you position the camera, that type of thing. Background color and not having a busy background, those would be some of those practice. But then still within that, like one of the domains is diagnostics. So we realize regardless of your discipline, you're gonna have some physical exam of some part. You're gonna need to do visual, you're gonna need some auditory, you might need some manipulation. I mean, that's across all. So then what we do is we make sure that we may not hit everything in your discipline you would do in an exam, but we hit something in your discipline that requires physical evaluation. We hit something that requires you to use some sort of second camera. So you can think that through. So that's where we bring in that domain one. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I was interested to learn the size of the course currently, and I just personally imagine it will grow a lot quickly. Are any of the programs currently including telehealth curriculum and any other regular coursework, or is this the only option for them?
Right now, I can speak very knowledgeably about my college, and then I can speak generally about UK from what I know. So in our college, in CSD, we do train all of our students at a rudimentary level because we have an in-house clinic as part of our training, and we do tele in that. So any new grad, they go through a 2-day kind of like boot camp. What we don't do in that, and we recognize that, is we don't get into a lot of the weeds with like the HIPAA, because that's all set up. They're in clinic, they have to come to clinic to do tele, so that's all been taken care of for them. So that's something that we are talking about. Where can we start embedding that? We need to do that. So for CSD, they get some basic. In the other programs, they don't unless they're out with a provider. So PT, AT, PA. Now, PA program, 2 of their faculty are doing or have done the certificate. So I think we'll start seeing more there, that none of the programs have it embedded right now. UK general, I know that there's some work going on in some social work. There's a group there. I think maybe it's school counseling. I don't know how deep they're getting into it, but that's really all that I know of. Everybody's wrestling with how do you embed this? What does it look like?
If you want to see quickly, you're looking at it for a lot of prevention studies. And it just seems like it's so I hope that they'll start incorporating more, because I don't know how clinicians will compete. And looking back as a for me, practicing clinician already, from the pandemic, I felt like I had to go learn these skills. So I would think it would be such a good opportunity to, if you're starting out in the learning space, to just go ahead with it and just build the skills into it.
I did disagree, and so we're having those conversations because when we did the certificate initially, COVID didn't hit. So it really was this elective, right? You're going to come out with a specialty, but now that COVID is hit, and I think we're all stepping back and trying to look at how we can maximize this chaos using a session I went to earlier today. That is a conversation. So it's a conversation of where does the certificate, what's the life of the certificate, right? Because I don't want that to die. I think it serves a place for a niche. But then also what of that do we need to embed across the programs and how for that? So those are conversations we're having in our college of how do we do that. So I think our initial approach is to at least start offering something at the undergrad, because we get a lot of people that matriculate from our undergrad into our grad programs, our PT, our CSD, even UK medicine. Not all, but I think that's one way to initially start while we work through, because curriculums are so tight. I mean, it's CSD, PT, and speech path, it's a bachelor's degree in speech path and a 2 year master's. So it's 4 years. And the master's is already 72 credit hours. And medicine could say the same. So, we're already so packed. Where do you add one more thing? So, yeah, but great point.
You have a question?
Oh, some questions?
There's a question in the chat. Diana's asking, could I take this course as a Donovan Scholar?
As a
Is that
Donovan
possible?
Scholar?
Is that possible, Janae?
I don't know. That's a really great question. It's something we have to look into.
If I'm going to take a certificate course, and I've gone through, as you know, and queried many of them all over, I think I'd like to take the one that you've got as I compare it to the American Board of Telemedicine courses. There's one at up in Jefferson College that has one, but I like the way you've laid this out.
Thank you. Thank you. So if you'll email me, Diana, and then we can look and see if that's possible.
Okay. And that proves to all of them there that at whatever age, you never stop learning. So I might as well use this to my benefit, and I can't think of a better place to go with it and let someone teach me. I'll send that to you.
All right. Thank you. Yes.
Do you guys do any telehealth CE, or what are your thoughts on telehealth?
Oh yeah, that's a great domain we'd like to get into. We have it right now. It's the way the academic system is set up, because then that's a fee for service, and that takes you into a different domain. And it's interesting you say this, because when we first started talking about what we wanted to do based on what we had learned, we had heavy conversations about, should we go CE first? You know, and what would that look like, and what would that entail, and then maybe give us some funds to support, or should we go at the pre-preparatory? And really what we did is it was the path of least resistance. As the pre-preparatory, we knew there was a need for that. We knew that professionals could take it still, and so we went that route. And so we do want to look at CE. There's just a lot of different players when it comes to that. Yeah. There's that, well, that, and also UK has, they have some set pricing for CE, and they've priced us out of the market. It's hard to be competitive with somebody else when you look at what they're saying you have to charge for CE. I'm just full on. Yeah. Yeah, so great question. Because we are proud that you can say our certificate comes from an accredited institution. And so that's nice to have on there. Yeah.
I think it's great that you're offering a certificate for things. And even if, depending on what we were discussing, the programs are building out a little bit more content like that, this can be an elevator from each of the students that come up with. I'm curious if other universities have some models across outside.
Janine, it's kind of hard to hear the question.
Okay, the question was, has a program like this type of certificate been standardized at other institutions? So I will tell you, as far as I know, no. So there are other institutions, like UVA does some great training with Old Dominion. I mean, fabulous. Some of their stuff on teleetiquette, I'm like, let's just go with that. I mean, it's fabulous. And a lot of that, though, has been very physician driven. So one thing I will say that's very unique about ours is coming out of the College of Health Sciences and being more kind of discipline generic, if that makes sense. I know that other institutions have some training, like I know 2 institutions have some nice, robust in-speech path. So there's some smaller, but I can't find the institution. And I'm saying that with full honesty, right? I'm not, well, you know, as soon as you say this, somebody gets on and, you know, so I'm just saying, to the best of my knowledge, we're the only ones in the country that offer this type of program with this type of course content that is more discipline agnostic, you might say. Yeah. Anything else?
Question. One more, along with that, do you take that opportunity with what is fairly novel what you're doing to maybe the projects or ideas to create interdisciplinary telehealth processes?
Yes.
And I guess along with that, one other side, I was to get a, I guess, idea of what the students are looking to do, skill set.
Sure. So kind of like, how do we build out more interprofessional practice and education and experiences? That was part of the question. And then the other was, do I know where students want to go with the skill set? So I'll start with the last part first. A lot of our students are taking the certificate because even pre-pandemic, when they first signed up and they didn't know about COVID, they said, this is where TEL is going and I want to be able to stand out. A lot of them took it because they're like, I want to be able to stand out. I heard from this third cohort that's going to start this summer. We're going to have some school psychologists in there. And they said, I was just Googling like jobs. And they said, every job I was looking at mentioned something about tele. So they were like, I think this is a skill set I need. And then I found your certificate. So I think students are starting to see a future provider needs this skill set. As far as interprofessional practice goes, I really like to use this as a springboard to maybe start doing more interprofessional education with simulations. For that and getting more healthcare disciplines, we already have an IPE program at UK called ICATS, and it brings, and it's very, very solid, but I think this would be a nice way to start bringing in more telehealth cases to that. And we're building a new health education building at UK, and it'll have simulation labs. And so I think now that we have this going, we can use, because we have a lot of cases built. We have a lot of IPE cases built for telehealth that our students work through. So I'm hoping we can get in and start building off of those and make them more robust.
I know MUSC has done some great stuff in professional. Dr. Reagan recently had a paper published. That's great. Wake Forest has a course, like overview course that was offered in there. It's been offered in their law school since 2017, but then PA students are legal and students are kind of audit and taking as well.
Oh, look at that. So
I just really hope that.
I'd love to know about it. Well, you know.
But yeah, I think there's not enough of it, and there's little blips of it, but this is weird.
Thank you. Yeah, I see little pockets, but not anything I think is robust right now is what we're doing. Yeah, so I think those are great. We did for our IP interprofessional in this, our competencies that we embedded came from the IPE published competencies. So in 2016, the Interprofessional Council came together and said, here are best practices. So I said, they're validated if it's good for them, and we just put them right into our certificate. So anything that's IPE related, IPP, came straight from those validated competencies. And I just said, let's put them right in. Just like what we talk about from sustainability, came from a sustainability model, the CEPR, which is robust, proven. And I said, if it's good enough for that, we're going to move it in and do what works. Let's train them right. So some of our competencies came from other domains that are validated.
I was a visiting lecturer this past year at Ohio University, and they asked me, they provided interprofessional kind of things to me and asked me to kind of make the guest lecture around that, like make sure I check those boxes when I was.
Excellent. Well, definitely dialogue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Johnny,
Anything else? Yes.
Johnny,
Yes.
are you there? From the research I've done, I think that's what makes this course particular stand out. They were asking, and I've spent the last year and a half looking at what's out there, what's available, what are the references, what types of resources. And what I keep finding or coming up against is you'll have some really great courses or programs, but they're very much physician driven. I mean, they're embedded in that, and that's where they're going with it. Or you will find that they're isolated webinars, and one is like for telepresenter. So you could be at any level, but you could take that piece. You can take the piece of clinical coordinating. What I don't see, though, even though Old Dominion, and I will say this, Old Dominion, a few years back, they did a presentation there at Matrix, and they did start an interprofessional telehealth situation, but it was through the nursing, School of Nursing. And they pulled in different disciplines to do a patient so that everybody would get that feel and what it's like. But I cannot recall, and I'll go back and check, any particular accredited program anywhere that is as interprofessional as what you've built. That's what I think makes this one stand out. It wouldn't matter what discipline or where you, even if you think you're going into something, it would be real appropriate for them to use your course and that content as they move forward in their careers. So that's just from what I have found. So I'll stick my head in that noose with you and it'll pop up somewhere. Okay.
And you're right about Dominion. They have a really nice interprofessional simulation that they do, and I am aware about that. That's I think a 1 or 2 week program.
Yeah.
And they bring people and run them through, and it is fabulous. And every program serves a niche. That's what I mean. Ours serves a niche. This serves a niche. So I think it's us all coming together and working and saying, what do you need at this time? And so this is what we have. This is what we're doing, and going about it. And we'll get better, and we'll grow, and we'll add, and we'll stretch, and we'll hurt, and but ultimately it's for our patients and doing what's best for them. So if that's all, I'll hang around. But thank you so much for coming. I appreciate those online. Thank you for coming and being online, and I appreciate the questions. And enjoy the rest of your conference.
Yeah, thank you, Janine. And I believe there's a session evaluation slide that the AV tech could put up, but I'm not.
Oh, we'll have fun the AV tech. I know there's. I think in the little Matrix
The web app.
web app
And
has.
I think there is a space to give a virtual evaluation, and you've gotten lots of praise in the chat, just so you know.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. All right, thank you.